George W. Bush launched an illegal war in Iraq.
How is Israel doing this different to that? Now, let me just start by saying,
hold on. This is like a basic IQ test.
Yes, sure. It is the exact same act, but it is a different motivation.
Let's jump into a Piers Morgan panel discussing Iran, Israel, and Gaza with Dave Smith in a rather heated debate. So leave us a like on the video. It lets us know you enjoy the content. It gives us a big boost in the algorithm. And let's see what context we can add.
The way they talk about how this is achieved, they talk about demoralization. And demoralization is the point where you can no longer tell truth from fiction. You can no longer tell right from wrong. And what happens when you reach that stage? You start making moral equivalencies between liberal democracies and terrorists and autocrats. So when you say there, yes, I do see that the Islamic Republic are terrorists, but I don't see how other liberal democracies are not terrorists as well. That is exactly the ideological subversion which you correctly identified, but don't see how it's a part of your own talking points.
Dave?
No, that's just a talking point yourself there. I mean, it's just not true. I know that the defenders of Israel often like to use this term moral equivalency, but it's just made up and doesn't apply to what I'm saying at all. I mean, if I were to say that I in no way ever said that the society of Iran is identical to the society of Israel.
And while this is clearly false framing she's doing, I would say I do agree that demoralization is often the goal of these kinds of like oppressors, right? And you can see a lot of people fall into that trap when they speak very anti-American. But you also see this with MAGA and how they try to portray media, professors, doctors, scientists, fact, academia, lawyers, judges, and more or less that they're somehow less trustworthy than like the RFK Juniors of the world who are financially incentivized to lie to you. But in this case, it just distracts from the issue. And it almost makes a U2 fallacy, right? As if to say, because Iran isn't a democracy and as moral as Israel, who is a democracy, they deserve what's happening to them. But the critique of Israel in Iran and in Gaza, at least from me specifically, is entirely on the militaristic grounds, the military action. And it's on the fact that I believe they're doing a genocide in Gaza and that they clearly are aggressors who rapidly want to expand throughout the rest of the Middle East.
American society, certainly within America, was far superior to Iraqi society under Saddam Hussein. But you can say that and also say that George W. Bush launched an illegal war in Iraq. These things aren't contradictory at all. And so what I'm talking about is, let me finish. What I'm talking about here is that the IDF is committing acts of terrorism. And so you can say it doesn't count when a government does it, but there's no objective moral standard to that. So I'm not making an equivalency between anything. I'm just pointing out that these two groups both have committed terrorism. And so in the same sense that you could point out how two people have both committed the same crime, that is not the same as saying those two people are identical in every way.
So when you, so you are drawing these moral equivalencies and you're doing exactly that. You're saying, I'm just saying, how is the IDF different to Hamas? How is the IDF different to the Islamic Republic?
I didn't say that. No, you're saying that.
And this is an example of her, again, subtly trying to move the goalpost to where she feels like she has an optics advantage. Oh, the Israeli society is much more moral, which is honestly kind of rooted in thinly veiled racism, as if the Arab peoples could not possibly be as moral as the Israelis. They're barbaric and savage and, the usual talking points. But it's a critique of action, again, which she, of course, doesn't want to get into because there's no comparison when you get into it. It was a grossly immoral act of sheer terrorism that could never be excused and should never be forgotten when Hamas attacked and killed 1,200 Israeli civilians on October the 7th. Since then, in endless, grossly immoral acts of terrorism, the IDF has killed 55,000 Palestinians, 20,000 of which are children, over 70% civilians. They've leveled over 80% of Gaza, done hundreds of millions of dollars in cultural damage, all while withholding aid, food, and other necessities from a group of people experiencing increasing levels of starvation and disease.
Both kill innocent people.
You have said now, and you've said online on Twitter when you were debating people, you asked this exact question, which is exactly what a demoralized person would ask. How is this different to that? How is Israel doing this different to that? Now, let me just start by saying,
hold on.
fair.
This is like a basic IQ test. I could say, how is this act different from this act? That's not saying how is this entity identical to this other entity. The point is that targeting innocent. Sure.
This it's exactly like saying, how is it different between a cop and a robber when they're both pointing guns at each other and they're both making each other feel threatened? Isn't that the exact same thing? Yes, sure, it is the exact same act, but it is a different motivation.
So I'll do the nerd thing and point out the problem with her logic here, and it's that it infinitely regresses. In the same way the IDF can say, well, we're responding to October the 7th, Hamas could say October the 7th was a response to apartheid and the occupation, and so on and so forth until a different motivation lends them to be the cop in that Mexican standoff hypothetical. A more apt example, because again, we're talking about the action, not the morality of the character, but how the morality of a character changes the morality of the action itself. So an example of that would be like a felon is at a gas station with his brother, and an unarmed 10-year-old child tries to rob his brother, so he shoots him without hesitation, compared to a cop at the gas station and witnesses an unarmed 10-year-old child trying to rob someone and then shoots the kid without hesitation. Is the cop's action more moral because the cop themselves is more moral? Like, no. In both situations, a child was unjustly shot, right? It both deserve moral condemnation. But what we commonly hear is that some sort of justification because Arab bad, right? Or because felon in this hypothetical would be, well, he was a felon, so of course the cop was more moral. But again, no, the cop still killed a child too. Israel is still doing terrorism as well. They're not just justified to kill whoever and still have the moral high ground until the end of time. And the reality is that both sides have a lot of culpability to admit and really hard concessions to make if peace is ever to be had in the region. And as long as we have people like Trump in power and those otherwise empowering those like Netanyahu, we're getting further and further from that being a reality.